It's probably better than my Peppa Pig shirt too.
Peppa Pig.
I'm ready, I suppose. Give it a
I've
try.
already I've already been recording for a second, so
Well,
I
this is
can
how good intros go in podcasts.
I can cut it afterward, theoretically.
I find it's more personable to have weird intros.
Yeah, I suppose. So you're gonna talk about money?
We are. That's why we are gathered here today.
Gonna start with like a timeline.
Um, I didn't really have a plan. I thought you were just ask questions, but if you want to, I can
Well,
say something.
what's the timeline?
But I
What
don't really
is
have it.
if I were to ask what is money, what would be your
Money
answer?
is the goods that are exchanged for a widely recognized exchange of goods.
Widely recognized exchange of goods?
Hold on, I will pull up the
Money isn't money
official
the
definition.
money would be the exchange, not like the intermedium currency, not the goods themselves, would it?
I'm not
Like
sure what you mean.
you have like the trading of goods, like people were trading food for other kinds of food or clothes or whatever. Like those are the exchange of goods, but isn't money something that came about like when we started using gold coins and stuff like
Well,
that?
it's really just when one of those commodities that were being traded became accepted as money. So it's essentially barter, except for one of those goods everybody accepts, and then it becomes money.
Okay.
So it's not really anything significantly different. It's just that instead of having to find what you're looking for, what you want, now you can exchange it for one item that can then be later exchanged for something else.
Yeah.
The the definition I wrote down: money generally serves as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. It's more of an idea backed by confidence. Money evolved from a need to simplify trade and establish a common standard for valuing goods and services. From the barter system to gold coins to paper currency, each step has been about making transactions smoother and more universally agreed upon.
Right.
That's not really a definition; it's more of an explanation. But so that clarifies.
Oh, I'm I know how to get myself louder. I move the microphone closer. I'll be
Turn
louder.
up the volume control.
Probably should have cleaned off my desk.
My desk is a freezer.
Hello. Can you still hear me? You can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now I'm louder, so I should turn you up a little bit. Sorry for that interruption.
Meh.
So why did you want to talk about money? Like, what is special? What interests you about the topic of money? It seems like a
Well,
very random thing.
I think it's one of those fundamental concepts that a lot of people kind of take for granted and don't really understand fully. And I enjoy um, understanding how and what it is gives you insight into a lot of economic events and how they, you know, unfold. I find it very useful, and it seems like a lot of people are missing that.
They're missing the explanation. They're missing
Well, just
the insight that comes from it.
yeah, the insight, the um, a lot of comments are made that seem to not grasp the foundational understanding of not just money, but like its utility. And a lot of people will say that you know the world would be better if we move back to barter, that kind of thing. And it's just misses um like that money really isn't something distinct and separate from barter.
Right. Like if we
it's
went back to the
it's
barter system, the concept of money would just develop again because of its utility.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially is barter, just with a widely recognized good.
Right.
So,
So what would be like the foundation, the fundamentals of that somebody would need to know to have that insight, to have that uh, the value of that perspective.
um, well, starting with what makes good money, like there have been a lot of different kinds of money used. In the United States, they used tobacco. In China, they used bricks of tea, but obviously those degrade over time. And so they and there's different qualities. So what makes good money is durability. You want something that won't degrade over time. Even gold can wear out in your pockets and such. So there's no really a perfect money. But portability, if you have bales of tobacco, or if you're using cows as money, they're not exactly the most transportable things. Divisibility, you want to be able to break it up into smaller units to buy less valuable things. Fungibility, which is each unit is exchangeable, so different qualities would have different values. You want it to be pretty even in its exchange. So, like, you want one piece of gold to equal the same weight of another piece of gold. That's fungible. And recognizability, you want everybody to understand that it's valuable. So, like, if you have a gold coin but they don't trust that that's not like been diluted with other metals, they might not accept it. So you want people to be able to recognize that this is, actually a valuable good.
Yeah.
And scarcity, so that you don't want, like in Africa, they had glass beads that they used as currency. And then when Britain came in, they knew how to manipulate glass a lot easier. So they
Yeah.
came in and with a bunch of their glass beads that they made really cheap with their technology, and grossly inflated the value of their currency. So you want it to be naturally scarce.
Ah,
Man, it's cold in here.
so what's the usefulness of knowing
uh,
that?
it really is just to be able to exchange value.
No, I
I mean,
mean the usefulness of knowing these things.
um,
how does it value what's the value of knowing them?
well, if you understand that, like, it gets more into the economics of it, but understanding that the necessity of scarcity. It's a common belief that fiat is better. There's which is
Fiat,
what we have now.
what's fiat?
Fiat is a currency that has value by decree, or some might say by force of decree. Like, um, it's basically a currency that doesn't have uh, a natural scarcity. So it's cheaper to print or create the currency than the value of the currency, which then can lead to somebody making a lot more of it, which devalues the currency. And um, it's not that fiat is necessarily worse. It's more that there's some trade-offs that have to be considered.
Well, that's like, what's the
So,
more specific definition of fiat? Like, I feel like you described more of what we have now, not what fiat means.
well, fiat really just means by decree.
So, like,
So it's
institutionally credible by an institution.
yeah, and the functional definition is the part where it's cheaper to make than its natural
Worth.
value.
Cool.
What? Yeah. So, um, I mean, you could call almost anything fiat, but really, what you want is a currency that costs as much to make as about the same as what it's being exchanged for. So, like, if you have gold, the value of taking the gold out of the ground, or the cost of taking the gold out of the ground and refining it and everything, that costs about as much as the exchange rate, which means that as you if it becomes more valuable, more people will turn to mining, and that will increase the supply, which will bring the value of the currency back down. Or if the value's low, then people won't mine it, so you won't be increasing the value until it goes back up again. So it has a natural feedback in regulating the value of the currency.
Yeah. What else?
Oh, I don't know what else. I thought you were going to ask me questions. I'm not sure if I answered
Well,
your initial question there, but
yeah, I feel like it was aside from what you were talking about. Like, I just asked what fiat means, but I don't. Yeah.
um, so like there's a lot of issues with um the having the more modern versions of currency, the fiat currencies, when anybody can increase the supply. That means that um, it devalues the currency, but not everybody has the same amount relative to their total net worth. So, like a poor person, they're going to take their currency, they have it for a short period of time, they'll turn around and spend that on consumables like food, and so their capital, the value of everything they own, is pretty low relative to currency. They have a lot of currency relative to everything else they own. Was a wealthy person will take that currency and they're likely to invest in something like um, real estate for their businesses, or just as investment or something. And that means that as the currency is inflated and becomes worth less, their properties become worth more. And the poor person, who, even though they're only holding the currency for a short period of time, relative to the rest of their capital, they become poor because they're holding it mostly currency for that time. So it like having a fiat currency can, if it's abused, which it often is historically, can end up resulting in uh, quite significant wealth disparities.
Right. Or at least being like a contributing factor.
Right. It's obviously not the only factor, but I mean, a
Um,
lot of people look at real estate and it seems to always go up. And I'm sure there's some of that, but also you have a currency that's going down due to inflation. So is it that the real estate's always going up and that's a good investment, or is it the currency's devaluing and it's not that great of an investment? It's just that you don't want to have the currency.
right. What's the difference between money and currency? Because you started using currency instead of money.
Yeah, I do often use them interchangeably unless I'm trying to make a point. Um, there's not really any super strict definitional difference, and I had my bias before I started trying to find like a good solid definition, and I couldn't really back that up when I started looking at the definitions. But generally, money is something that comes out of the natural market conditions of exchange. It's usually a commodity, um, although there have been fiat currencies in the same sense that a bank would issue notes, and sometimes they would overissue those notes. So, um, and the market would still accept, and technically that would still be considered a money by most definitions. Um, some sound money advocates would say it has to be a commodity. There has to be something else backing it, but that's kind of, um, I guess you might call judgmental. Like if the market considered a different, like non-commodity money more valuable, I mean, I guess you might say who's to argue. But it's more the what comes out of a natural market versus currency is more institutionally pushed. It's when an institution, a government or a bank issues a currency or issues money. It's like, but it's backed by an institution that then it
Is it
becomes currency.
is it kind of like the change from being something that is your own choice as to how much you value it to something that you have no choice as to how much it's valued at? Like a banknote, like if for some reason the banknote was worth less than the bank says it is, then it's worth less, and the bank has no choice, and you're not forced to value that the same as what the bank values at. Whereas currency, like money issued from the government, would be you're forced to value that currency at the stated value. Like a $20 bill is worth a $20 bill for you and any of the businesses that you go to spend it. Like they can't say this $20 bill is worth 25 or 15.
That I mean that
Is
does
that
kind of
like a part?
fall. I don't know if it's a part, but it does kind of fall in a practical sense in that kind of same area. But it's there's kind of a little bit of
Regional,
overlap between the definitions.
like
What?
regionally based is kind of what I'm trying to say. Like in the
Yeah,
country of America, the borders of America, the value of the American currency is X.
it could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You could have like an international body that's an institution, you know,
So
that
it just
that
is kind
issues.
of it can get to be kind of a gray area.
Yeah, and really the definitions are so inexact that almost any one you pick, somebody could argue with, and
Semantics.
yeah. But typically, my bias is I usually use money to reference the more commodity, naturally limited supply, and then currency. Pretty much, usually, I'm referencing fiat because almost nobody issues specie, which is like coins anymore, like at their natural value. Like
Right.
a U.S. penny is worth more, or it's costs more to make than the actual value in metal. So it's almost reverse of fiat. But
Yeah. So what you're saying is I should invest in pennies.
I mean, sure, you could. I, they say it's illegal to deface them, but people do all the time. So
Well, I mean, it's illegal to deface them, but what if you just held on to them until, I don't know, the government
right.
exploded, I guess?
But and another point that I think is useful is there's a concept called Gresham's law. Making sure I'm not confusing it with, is it Gresham's law or Graham's law? There's a concept where they say that good money pushes out, or bad money pushes out good. So like if you have a fiat currency and competing with gold, more people will collect and spend the fiat than the gold. That's kind of the concept that gets propagated. But what's actually happening is there there's a high incentive to use the fiat. Either you're required to be paid in it, or required to pay taxes in it, or something to that effect. So people use the fiat, but they don't want to hold the fiat because it's not retaining value well. So then they will spend the fiat, and then so the fiat is what's in circulation, and they're holding on to the good money, or anything really of value that's going to increase relative to the other currency.
Right. So it's like people holding on to gold.
Yeah, people are more likely, and which is why people will say, well, people don't spend gold anymore, so it's not a useful currency. But it's kind of backwards. People don't spend gold anymore because they're trying to get rid of the currency that's not as valuable.
Right.
If if they if they didn't have the fiat, they would be more likely to spend something that retained its value better.
It's like the value is better, but the utility is not. So you would use one for the utility, like the ease of transaction and stuff, and then the other one, it's still has value and it still has worth as a currency, but because the other one is more useful, you don't use it in that way.
Yeah, that's partially it. I mean, obviously, if you had something that was more transportable, but not as durable,
Transportable?
yeah, you carried
Transportable.
around
Oh,
portable.
right.
Just say portable.
It's
You would
you
carry it
just
around.
you like paused funny and the word didn't make sense, but go
I'm
ahead.
semi shivering.
Oh, because it's so cold.
um, yeah. So if you have something that's portable and you carry it around with you to spend, and maybe it's not as durable, so you don't want to hang on to it, you might even without like um, a government incentive, you might still use that more for transactions because it's easier. You know, you might take that to like buy a coffee or something versus like something that's less portable but more durable. You might hold on to that, and but you still might use it for more expensive transactions. So if you want to buy like a house or something, you know, you might want to, you would have to dip into your savings essentially, which might be that more durable. Um, but but generally, when they talk about it, they're talking about it's usually an institutionally backed fiat currency or diluted currency. Sometimes they mix tin with the gold to devalue it and make more of it for cheaper. So you usually it's about that kind of behavior that, and people spend the currency that's decreasing in value. And what's interesting is sometimes while they were doing that, they're devaluing the currency, mixing with like tin or brass or making it smaller. They'd shave the outside edges and then remint smaller coins. Um, People would just naturally, almost intuitively, uh, figure out which one is less valuable and spend the less valuable one while hanging on to the more valuable one.
Hmm. Did you want to talk about new currencies that people find controversial, like Bitcoin and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty big discussion, you might say, about like whether or not Bitcoin is money or not, and that's to me that's somewhat irrelevant because what the reason people value money is because of its what makes good money, things like the durability and scarcity and Bitcoin does satisfy a lot of those traits of what makes good money. So um, some of the things it doesn't do well, you might say it's not durable because if the power goes out, you don't have access to it, even though like it's a decentralized ledger. So if there's other people in the world that still have that ledger, you still have it. But I mean, if you can't access it, it's kind of like, what does it matter?
Well, you can't spend it.
Yeah,
You
it's
have it, but you can't spend it. It's like having gold, but nobody takes gold.
right. Well, and there's even a kind of debate over like whether you can own Bitcoin because it's not something that's tangible and you can take hold of. I mean, can you own something that exists on somebody else's computer? Like it's information, it's a concept that's been recorded on thousands of computers all over the world. So is it really that you own it or are you just able to usefully use it,
Well,
you know?
I feel like that's, semantics. Like, what does it
It
mean to
is.
own something? Because
And
if
I guess
somebody, I was gonna say, if somebody has that information and attributes value to it and attributes its ownership to you, then it doesn't matter because you have all the usefulness of ownership. So, yeah.
yeah, and I guess I only bring it up because it brings up a interesting discussions about, you know, what actually is ownership and it's just one of those things that make those concepts and discussions more salient. Like Bitcoin is
Salient?
pseudo anonymous, so like um
What's
there's no
salient?
there's no you connected to it. What's that?
What's salient mean?
Um like top of mind, more tangible in a kind of conceptual sense,
Oh,
if that
okay.
makes sense.
What's salient? I missed what you said after.
Um just the discussions about like what it is to own something,
Oh,
it's one of those concepts people don't really think about a lot. And when you start getting into the discussions, it can be difficult to agree on definitions because people's concept of words comes from their use and not necessarily definitions. You
well,
can go in
wouldn't it?
circles for a long time.
I This doesn't seem like it's on the same topic as money, but wouldn't the definitions be uh like the responsibility of whatever side is describing their position? Like
Yeah,
I feel like it's I feel like there's a lot of common sense in conversation that for me it doesn't make sense why people don't realize it. And that's like one of the things, like in this conversation, the responsibility of defining the words that you're using is yours because you're explaining something you want to explain, the concept of money and different uh, tangents related to that topic. And so it's your responsibility to explain the definitions if there's like a incongruent in difference of
Yeah,
understanding.
and, and it's more just that I mean, just because a person is responsible doesn't necessarily mean that the that communication is happening. So if you're trying to have a discussion, and it's more just like the concept. People don't necessarily um, think about it hard and have like a firm foundational understanding of what it actually means. Like somebody will say, I know this is pretty off topic, but some people will say that you have a right to property, and that's a great concept, but it almost doesn't actually exist in reality. Like if you own something, you feel like you own something, like I have a right to this thing because I own it, and nobody agrees and comes to take it away from you. In practice, you don't actually own it. Like in the real world, like if you aren't able to retain control over it in a practical sense,
What
regardless of your concepts of rights, it doesn't have a
own
practical use.
I feel like ownership it comes in like tiers. So
Yeah,
you have like you have the absolute ownership, which is control. If you control the thing, if you have the ability to control the thing, then you own it. And at its most basic, back in the day or whatever, ownership would be backed by like physical strength or like a communal privilege, like the leader of a tribe or whatever. They have ownership of that tribe, that influence, that power, and whatever the things that they can control with that, they own it because they can control it. But then there's like it gets less and less, it gets more and more uh far away from that as you have things that are owned because people say that you own it.
yeah,
And like if people say that you own it but you don't accept that you own it, then you don't own it either. So it's like all these different.
yeah. And it's semi-related because a lot of these concepts like like language, like definitions, concepts of rights and who owns what, or like who has authority over what, and same with money, like which money is valuable, which isn't, you know, and a lot of these things, like at a fundamental level, are just um, agreed upon through a kind of long process and evolution of people interacting, and there's nothing like super specifically set in stone, or like this is the definition,
It's
like this is the money, you must declare it.
it's a social construct.
Yeah, yeah. But some people don't like that concept. It doesn't.
Well,
There's a lot of things that are just socially constructed. They
it's
only
true.
exist because people decided they do.
It's like
Like
who
collective
who is
consciousness.
that? Who is that philosopher who is like, what is a chair?
I don't know the philosopher that came up with that analogy, but I use it all the time because it gets really vague fast when you try and define things super specifically. It's like when you're studying quantum mechanics and you get more and more fundamental until it's like almost everything disappears. It's like everything is just a excitation in an energy field, and you're like, so it doesn't exist. You're like trying to grasp onto your understanding of reality and just keep slipping away the more fundamental you get.
Yeah, it was Plato.
Oh, but honestly, one of my least favorite philosophers.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I don't know. It just I didn't think his points. I mean, I love Plato's Cave. Plato's Cave is a fantastic analogy. Like I
What's
think one of the most
Plato's
pivotal, important analogies for understanding. But a lot of his, and I don't even have an example right now.
Oh,
Just like reading him, I'm like, no, that's. I feel like you should have known that that's not the case, or like even back then, I feel like that was pretty well understood. But
so Plato's theory, it says that it is a member of a group or set or category of things called chair because it has the same essence, purpose, or form. Chair is also a member of another set or form called furniture, again because it shares in the same essence as the members of that set, such as table and lamp.
yeah, was he the one that said it like pre-existed the creation of the object? Like
Concept pre.
there was something like chairness that exists in an ethereal world, and when you create it, you're like pulling it out. Was that a different?
No, yeah, that was the same. That was the same guy. I'm not sure he said it in quite the same way, but as
Right.
he like flushes out his the the theory that he states, he talks about how like there had to exist the concept without a name before people in our brains could have recognized it and ascribed
Uh,
meaning
I
to the concept, ascribe like boundaries to the
right.
concept.
I think that was uh um explained the first time I heard it, because that makes a lot more sense. That the concept of it existed before the label for it.
Right. So like
That makes
when
more sense.
when when you would so here's probably part of why people might hate the whole social construct, the idea of social construct.
The construct of
Um,
social constructionism.
right. Is because when you say it's a social construct, you're talking about the word that's describing the boundaries, not the concept. Like the concept exists, it's not a social construct, but the word we use and the boundaries we give it, that's a social construct.
Right. Well, I mean, there are a lot of things that the concept is socially constructed. Like,
Right. Yeah, like
the,
abstraction.
yeah, it's abstracted into culture through um, informal agreements between, like, the value of money. Like even the concept of value is a social construct, even though even animals have those kinds of concepts. They make you know semi agreements and have communication and exchange things of value. You know, I mean, it's still not a physical, tangible thing, and it really only exists in those interactions between people, and it's not.
Yeah.
And it gets hard to hold on to when you start deep delving into the fundamental concepts of it. It's a thing that almost doesn't exist, but it does.
Yeah, that's why I like when you learn about like I guess it would be like debate or something, like where you learn about the um how to construct logical, rational arguments and stuff because it, or I guess it'd be kind of philosophy too, because it like it emphasizes the the starting point as being like nothing, not real. Then you have your premises, and you're like, these are the this is the foundation of my argument, and then you have the more and more complex uh, concepts that are layered. I don't know. It just like when you have conversations with random people on Twitter or whatever. Um, the thing that I think is lacking, that's making it, or that can make it very not useful, is structure.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
the more structure you have to the conversation, it's like equivalent to the correlated correlated to, not equivalent, but correlated to like the usefulness or the amount of communication. But that's not the topic of money. So what else do you want to? Do you have any? We
I mean,
talked
I
about
wrote
the
down so much stuff. I mean, um, so I'm there's a lot of fun like little tidbits. Like the term bit comes from back in the early American colonies. They it was when Britain was ruling over the colonies. They had uh, a law against creating specie, which is like coins. So they didn't have any coins, so they had to find use other nations' coins. Sometimes they used these beads made out of shells that the Native Americans used, and that's kind of why they got addicted to paper currency because that was one of the few things that they could make. And then they
what
found out
was
you could
the
make more of it.
what nation was this?
The United States, like the early colonial United States, they couldn't make coins, and so they used a lot of other nations'
Oh,
coins. And one of the most
because
popular coins to use internationally was the Spanish dollar.
well,
Is what
couldn't they use Britain's currency?
they did. They just didn't have enough trade to have enough in the United
Oh,
States because they
like
were
there was
so
a currency shortage.
yeah, and it was kind of artificial because they had metal. They could have minted their own coins even out of cheaper metals like copper or something, but
Yeah,
they it was against the law. So they used other nations' coins, but like I don't remember the value in today's dollars, but a Spanish dollar was a lot of money. It'd be like trying to act economically if all you had to spend with $1,000 bills. Like it wouldn't be it'd be very difficult. So they would
yeah.
cut the dollars up into eight pieces and use those,
Really?
and they were called pieces of eight or bits.
That's crazy.
And bits are still used today. 8 bits makes a byte in a computer byte of data. So
Well,
that's where that,
you could also say a little bit of a thing.
yeah, or a 2-bit shave is a shave that costs 2 bits.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of sayings that hung around like that. Um, most of the terms for currency are either a weight or just the name for an old metal coin. So like the dollar comes from I don't know how you pronounce it, thaler, which was an old European coin, and we still use the term dollar today. A pound is obviously a pound of silver. Peso was a unit of weight. Um, Ruble was a unit of weight, and those have still stuck around even as we've moved to fiat currencies. I find that pretty
So
interesting.
I, there's something that I'm not super good at explaining, but I know exists, and um, on the topic of money, so I thought I'd ask you. Um, so there is there is an amount of inflation that's healthy for an economy because it provides like the a better supply or whatever, making transactions easier, making um, what is it? It's like somebody once explained to me that it's sort of like betting on the economy improving, um, because that's what's giving the currency its worth is like the strength of the economy of the country that it comes from. So you print a little bit more, or you create greater supply, a little bit greater supply than what you think will be the growth of the that economy. Do you under does the
Mhm.
concept I'm trying to explain?
Yeah,
So can you explain
it's
it better?
not really. It's a concept I don't subscribe to, but
Oh,
so I will do my best to explain it, and then the counter argument.
yeah,
um, but you did explain it well. The concept is that um, to the a small increase in inflation, which is natural because you never really run out of anything. There's still a, an insane amount of gold in the ground. So like
yeah,
the idea that you're going to run out, you're always going to be producing more, even in scarce situations. And that what they say the ideal is usually about what the natural rate of inflation would be. So I think that's where it kind of came from. But the idea is that increasing the supply, you increase the liquidity, which increases spending, which increases the velocity of money and drives up the economy and the value. And that's not necessarily exactly wrong, but the idea that you need to increase the supply of the money is kind of, um, I think it's kind of like reversing correlation and causation. There are events that happen that kind of correlate with decreases in the increases in the value of the currency, which people would say. So they, I'm trying to remember what they call it. It's something like a death spiral or something that they call it, where um, people aren't making anything, so there's nothing to buy, and so the and it kind of goes in this spiral. And if you inject cash into it, people will then spend it. So then people will make things, and that really doesn't happen. It's just there's a correlation of events that makes it look like it. The problem with a limited supply in currency is that divisibility. Can you break it down further? Because if you can break it down further, then the value of the currency just changes with the market, and effectively, I mean, you have an infinite supply of money because as the value goes up,
prices.
you can cut it in half and then
Yeah.
use a smaller denomination. So I don't know
What
if I explained that well. And
I think so. It's like I don't know. It's like the trickle down effect versus the trickle up effect, or whatever they call it. Like it's just two
yeah,
different sides of the same coin, and theoretically they'll both
well, I mean,
kind of happen, but maybe not.
no, I mean, yeah, I mean, it does happen, but it's like it's one of the it's kind of similar where I feel like it's misframed as like these are the options that for people to argue over. Like
Like a
both the
false
concept of supply
dichotomy.
side, yeah, both the concept of supply side and demand side economics. When people say trickle down economics, so the term trickle down economics originally came from a comedian to reference New Deal policies that Hoover actually started, which is how it got stuck on a political side because Hoover started it. But they were New Deal policies that Roosevelt continued, and they were mocking the idea of helping out the businesses to make the people better off. And there was a Keynesian concept that um, if you increase the cost of goods, so people have to pay more to buy things, that will give investment to those industries so that they'll be able to expand and increase production, which will then bring down the cost of those goods. And that was what was initially called supply side economics or trickle down economics, which got associated with supply side economics. But supply side economics is basically saying the government should put an influx of capital into the businesses and that they will produce more goods and they will and then the demand side economics is that the government should put an influx of money into the consumers and then they will go out and buy more goods and that will so it's kind of like the same argument and like which one's better and it's like maybe the third option is you don't have the government put a influx
It's
of
like a circle.
yeah
It's like one end of a circle and the other end of a circle, but the theory is still a
yeah
circle.
and there is like an observable difference like it does appear supply side economics is marginally more effective economically but it's
Well,
like what does that even mean like
there's too many
huh?
variables. There's too many variables.
Yeah.
Like it could just be that it's working the best in that moment in which we were looking at it because of all the other,
Well,
you
and
know,
how do you measure the economy? Like, okay, the
yeah,
economy is increasing, but is it increasing for the poor or the wealthy, or is it like lifting both at the same time? Like, it's
yeah,
really hard to say. Like, and people manipulate data and stuff to make their
unfortunately.
arguments.
So another thing that is related to like the inflation, I feel like is the uh the debt, like how people talk about how it's bad for the country to be in so much debt. Well, it's kind of when it was explained to me the benefit of having a little bit of inflation, it's also similar to having some debt. Like having a country having debt is like a investment in the future of that country's economy. Because, like for example, if I take out a loan for $1,000 and the interest on that $1,000 is 5%, and then I take that $1,000 and I invest it in the stock market, and the stock market goes up 6, 7, 8, 10%, then I've made 5% profit on my on the debt, even though I'm carrying that debt for the length of the time that I have that investment.
Yeah, and the concept of utilizing debt is like absolutely valid. Although I would point out that's one of the major causes of the Great Depression was people taking out loans to invest in the stock market. So then and then the government was manipulating the currency. So when that changed and people were underwater and couldn't sell their stocks to pay back their loans, um, but the problem with a country's debt isn't really the debt so much, and it does act as inflation because um, they are issuing bonds that have value, and then people are buying them with currency given to the government. So that basically created value, even though it's not currency, it's value created out of thin air. Um, but that's not necessarily bad because I mean, any bank could do that. Like, you could just give me
Yeah,
money and I could say, well, I mean, that's basically what debt is. You're giving me money and I'm saying, well, I'm going to give you more money later, you know, And it
Yeah.
it is obviously very useful. If you can use money to make more value than the cost of the loan, then
Right.
you've seemingly created value out of nothing. The problem with the um, like a country's debt is just when it becomes like it can become out of control, and there's there's no like meritocratic way to say that it was invested wisely. Like
Yeah,
a
for
country
sure.
can keep issuing more and more debt, and there's nothing to say you spent that money wisely. Now
Yeah. Like
you're cut off.
I feel like that's the biggest thing missing from people who have that as part of their like political worldview is like they might say that the debt is bad and we need to do this or that thing, but the conversation that I've heard, at least the conversation from people, never goes beyond that. Like it doesn't matter how much debt we have, it's like it matters what the debt is in, like who did we borrow it from and for what reason, and what are we using the money that we borrowed, what are we using that money for, and what how much risk is involved in what we used the money for. And like, you know, like
Yeah,
for example, like a huge portion of the United States debt is invested in United States companies and United States bought, like stocks and bonds, like you were saying with the, I guess it would just be bonds because the government doesn't issue stocks. But
they do now.
really, how does that
Yeah.
work?
I mean, I haven't studied a lot, but basically, it's part of quantitative easing, but there's a more liberal quantitative easing where they give out the money with less restrictions.
I
And I
have
don't remember
thought
all the details,
I have
but
thought it would be
they
really
give it to banks.
cool. Oh, okay. I have thought it would be super cool if the government had a way to, um, like you have your politicians that you vote for, right? Like you could have government policy or government institutions that you vote for by buying bonds that are associated with that. Like the one that I'm thinking of is NASA. Like NASA's pretty cool. Like I would want to support NASA, whereas, maybe I don't think the FDA deserves more funding or the military. A lot of people think the military is spending way too much. Like it would be so cool if we could be like invest in NASA and not in the military, rather than all these things being
Or like a
decide,
stock, like buying a
decided.
stock in the
Yeah, like right now the budget's decided by Congress, right? Like it's just we decide that this is going to be how the tax dollars are spent. It's like instead of your tax dollars going into this bucket of money that the Congress owns because they control it, it'd be cool if there was less taxes and then they had the option for these
yeah.
bonds or something like it. I think that'd be cool.
And there's a lot there, and like interesting things that you could do with like like conscription. Like instead of having conscription, if you felt like
What's
you needed to fight a
conscription?
war, um,
Oh, like the draft. Yeah, okay.
right. So if instead of implementing the draft, if you felt like you had to fight a war, you could issue bonds to um, get money to hire people, you know. And if less people actually want to fight that war, then you're going to have to sell more bonds to get more money
Yeah.
to give them
I
more
feel
money.
like
And then
I
there's a natural
yeah. I feel like it would have to be some of both because like sometimes a war needs to be happening very quickly.
Right, but the oh, you're saying you wouldn't have time to
or
issue the bonds.
like investments like NASA or something. Well, they need the money before they plan their missions. Like they can't plan their missions with money they don't know if they have or not. And so having like some cash available as like a for sure thing rather than being dependent on the will of the people
But, I
would
mean,
be
they could have, like, a
beneficial.
GoFundMe. Like, "Here's the mission plan. Here's what we estimated it will cost.
That would be
Donate."
cool.
If the
Yeah.
people fund the mission, then they go. If they don't fund the mission, they don't go.
And they could have it for an extended period of time. So they'd be like, this is the mission, but we're not going to go on this mission until we reach X amount of dollars.
But 20, 50 years later, it finally gets funded, and
You know, NASA is coming back with their asteroid sample. When's that happening? When when is asteroid sample? They're talking about how they expect to find components of life or components of
DNA.
biological, right? Something, some precursor to life that um when is it? When is asteroid sample coming back?
I mean, I think they've detected, like, a bunch of precursors to, like, amino acids and stuff
Oh, it
in
already came back.
nebula clouds and stuff. The chemistry
Yeah,
seems to happen in space with, like, cosmic ray providing the energy for the reactions or
yeah.
something.
They said they even found like base pairs or something.
Oh,
Whatever,
really?
however the yeah, that's what they said. Um, Osiris REX mission returned a sample from the near-Earth asteroid Bennu to Earth on September 24th, 2023.
Nice. Wait, so
And it's so what?
I missed the date. So it's already returned, or it's gonna be returned shortly?
Yeah, returned a week or two ago.
Nice.
Let me see if I can find after returning to Earth containing precious asteroid metals materials. Uh, Scientists gasped as the lid was lifted.
Did they really? Do you have confirmed
That's what it
evidence of that?
says.
Did they really gasp? Like, no, I have it on
Uh,
video. They gasped.
NASA's Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division, which is based in JST, wrote Tuesday in a post on Twitter. That's what the Senate did.
Yes.
Curated and divided up for study among scientific institutions. So they're going to split it up into little bits and send it all over to people that bought it, I guess, invested maybe.
Have you heard about Avi Loeb's experiment to retrieve the asteroid from the ocean floor?
No,
He he after Oumuamua, that one that was supposed to come from out of the solar system,
yeah,
he started looking through data because the U.S. government tracks a lot of the sky, and their equipment is sensitive enough to get the velocity and everything and the direction. And he calculated this asteroid that they detected would probably have come from outer space. And then he was able to confirm. They wouldn't tell him enough about the specs to confirm scientifically, but they told him that they did the calculations and it was confirmed scientifically. So then he got a privately funded, um, what do you call it, mission? I don't know, to go out and scrape the ocean floor and
have
pick
they
up
found it?
pieces. They found asteroid pieces, a lot hasn't been released about it, but
Yeah.
they're starting to study them. It's mostly broken up, so it's a lot of tiny asteroid pieces.
Yeah. That's so
But
cool. The things that we
yeah,
can do.
and those are extra. The solar would be extra solar. Yeah, solar system. Extra solar objects that we have knowingly discovered
Seemingly.
physically. Huh?
Theoretically.
Yeah, in theory.
Allegedly.
I mean, really, it could have just gone around to the store and then come back. That would be a
Maybe.
coincidence.
Yeah. Could have been. Could have been. Or it could have been its orbit could have been affected by um, something before we tracked it, like planets we don't know about or something. Its orbit could have been pushed or pulled by other things, and then when it came into our sight, it seemed like it was at an angle that would only be explained by, yeah,
Like it slingshotted around Jupiter and Saturn for 20 years and just
yeah,
going faster and
something.
faster and faster and faster.
Oh, well, it wouldn't, because the sun is too big. It wouldn't slingshot around just Jupiter, because then it would have had to go be affected by the sun, wouldn't it? I, I
I
don't
don't know
know.
what you mean.
I, d-
It just
I
has
don't know.
to. I mean, like I really don't understand the physics at a fundamental level, but what's happening, where the energy comes from, because you think it comes down, so that when it comes out, it should be the same speed because it's the same energy going in as coming out. But what ends up happening is it's actually stealing a slight amount of the rotation of the planet. And the planet's so
Yeah,
massive, it doesn't really affect it. So,
right.
I mean, at the right angle, I think theoretically you could just have it like
How
swing
is,
different planets.
yeah, well, we do that. Like, we plan missions using like, that's the only way we'd be able to get around to most. Anyway, this is definitely off topic, but uh,
We're already gone. We're
the
already gone.
Earth, the reason that we have most of our weather patterns is because the Earth is spinning. So, how do flat earthers explain weather patterns?
You know, in the long conversation I had with a significantly like fairly smart flat earther, I don't think we covered weather.
Yeah,
So I really don't know how that explanation. It was
it
mostly about
just
observation and physics and
I don't I don't understand. Like, we have a model that makes so much sense. It's like
yeah,
Occam's
but
razor. Like,
a lot of models turn out to be wrong, and you got to keep an open mind for the point zero
an
zero zero zero
open
zero one
an
percent
open
chance that
mind. So this is what I don't understand about like conspiracy and everything. Okay, so a big part of that kind of motivation to believe in those sorts of things is like the skepticism, like a distrust of institutions or whatever. It's like
hmm,
having the distrust and desiring that skepticism. It's it it just because you're questioning or disbelieving the the popular narrative, doesn't mean you then go and believe wholeheartedly another theory that has less evidence. Like, you can say that it has evidence, but if the fact is it's less evidence, and then to believe it with more confidence than the one, like, you should, in my head, even if I were to become a flat earther or something, it wouldn't make sense to believe the flat earth theory more than the institutional narratives, because you would just hold them, at the very most you would hold them 50-50 in my head.
I think I think I mean I'm sure there's a lot of different and a lot of it's trolling. You got to account for
Uh,
that.
that's
But I
true.
think a lot of it isn't so much about weighing the facts. It's about finding out that somebody lied to you. So like, and it's not necessarily a lie, but maybe an oversimplification that was asserted too hard or something like that. When you find out, I mean, there's just I don't have an example for flat off the top of my head, but there's so many things that are grossly dumbed down in mainstream education to the point where like it's basically not true. Like I mean, there's a lot of things like that that are just grossly oversimplified and gives people a perception
Yeah.
that they know understand something that's
You
just far too complex. And
I've run into that.
once you find out that they're lying, it's like, oh, what else are they lying about? And then
Yeah,
somebody makes a really poor argument, but sounds good. You're like, this guy's not telling the truth. Oh, this guy told me something new that I don't have never heard before. He must be.
yeah,
And I think it just kind of pushes you, you know, because you start digging into conspiracies. It's like that. There's like so many things. You're like, oh shit, I didn't know about that or that or that or
yeah.
that. And then
I was talking to one guy who finally blocked me about the election fraud thing,
oh yeah,
and I tried to keep an open mind, and every time he would tell me about like evidence or whatever, like I would look into it and I'd be like, okay, well this is what that means, and it's not what you say it means. And then
yeah,
like the last thing we the thing that made me like lose all faith in the conversation was he was talking about like some politician somewhere in Georgia or something was talking about how they had like an expose that they were going to release on some date, and I was like, okay, well we'll see what they release on that date. And
is that my
that
pillow guy?
no, it's somebody else.
I've
But
never heard of him.
that date rolled around and it was like a non-starter, nothing. And I came back to him and I was like, so did you watch the thing, the expose? And he's like, nah. I'm like, you don't even care, do you?
Well, and that's I mean, like about the election, it's like you don't need all the conspiracy stuff, and you don't need it to be legal or illegal or like you have power centers competing. They're gonna break the law. Like one of them's gonna win, whether legal or not. Like it's
And there was so
and
much.
people are gonna make up lies about each side, and some of them's
Yeah,
gonna be truth. And
there was so much. um like there were things that were like unsavory, like you would look at it and common sense dictates that what was happening was unfair, but what they were doing was completely legal.
I mean, or legal within legal standards. A lot of that stuff
Well, it
is
used to be
unconstitutional,
the
but
thing.
we've reinterpreted and courts have ruled. And
Yeah, the thing that I'm remembering is like people who like come to you and they have like pamphlets and they
yeah,
help you vote, like they stand there while you vote, and
hmm
that can skew things because you can choose who you go to and help vote, so then you can
hmm
go to only the people that you know will vote for you or that you think you can convince or whatever else. And those originally, from what I read, originally that kind of thing, those people were hired by the government to do that job, like originally, because
yeah,
I don't know, not enough people voted generally or something like that. And they were like, this is a problem. Like, we need to figure out how to help to get people voting. So then they hired these people to go and help people vote. And like they would have, like pamphlets and stuff
yeah,
with
and like
propaganda on them.
hundreds of years. Oh, right, and hundreds of years ago, like before they had cars or like you know, the nearest town was 50 miles away, and people only made 50 cents a day,
Yeah.
like getting to vote, it would have been a nearly insurmountable
Challenge.
task.
So anyway, anything else you want to say about money?
Um,
Back
did
to
you
the
know that
what
a
did I?
shot of whiskey comes from buying whiskey with a bullet or a piece of lead to make a bullet? That's where the term a shot comes from, because you could buy whiskey
That's
with a shot.
that's cool. That's good to know. Fun fact.
I have a lot of those fun facts, but I think I said all the core
The main
information.
the main
I
points.
thought I thought you would ask more about details of, but
I mean, the problem with asking more details is I don't know what to ask. I don't know
yeah,
what topics have more depth to them or not.
right. It's the first one. We'll get better.
Sure. What should I talk be doing the next one?
I think so. Let me know what topic.
I was thinking bias.
That's a good one. I mean, that
I
can go
like
deep. There's a lot there.
yeah, I like one thing that I find that people do, well, it's like a natural thing that people, it's like an innate quality of humans, but also could be something that you learned not to do. But people regard bias in a way that is unhelpful, and then they like use that information in unhelpful ways that doesn't make sense. But you
You're biased.
could,
No, you're biased.
right, you could use, or there is a useful way to use bias, and then I was gonna go into that and like how different biases have different credibility, and you need to know that if you're gonna use the have the usefulness of it.
Hmm.
Uh,
And
but
just in a like, I guess it's not really related exactly, but the whole realm of fallacies and cognitive biases and psychology, there's so much there that
yeah,
like
you could go on and on and on.
yeah,
But
I'm
I wanted to focus very specifically on like how do you use this
yeah, that's useful.
information because just knowing it is just knowing the information can be an a negative can negatively impact your worldview rather than positively impact it. Like how everybody's arguing over racism and like the change in the way that racism is portrayed, and it's like, guys, it doesn't matter, you know, like it's
Yeah.
just a
What
word. Like you
what
think it's driven by some political narrative, and from what I can tell, it's motivated by academics, and then you know that the political narrative certainly pushed it to the forefront, but like it just doesn't matter because you can change the word if you want in a discussion. Yeah.
yeah. What's the fallacy that's people exaggerate how much they know on a topic? I'm drawing a blank. I had a guy accuse me of that. He was like, well, okay, this is weird. He commented on dad's page asking to have a conversation about the topic. And I was just like, why are you comment like you click on my profile, you find my dad, you go to his page, you comment what's the point
Oh,
here?
that's I don't know if they do it as much anymore, but for a little while Facebook really pushed that. So
Oh,
it's
really?
yeah, so he would see in his timeline John commented on dad's post and then it has a
But
little comment
it
bar.
wasn't on Dad's post. It was on a it was a completely random person on the internet.
But if there's a relationship, then Facebook could have shown it to
Um,
him. Like it would
but
have
it was weird.
it would have said the relationship. So if it wasn't like something that you could describe, then it probably wouldn't. But for a little
And
while,
then
I saw those.
he was like super focused on me, and I was like, oh, okay, he just wants to get to know me a little bit before we have a discussion. And it's like, well, what are
Sure.
you? And I'm like, I'm a vac truck operator at this company, and he's like, oh, and so you think you're gonna know about this topic because you're a truck up? That's this fallacy. And I was like, you don't use that fallacy to accuse somebody of having the fallacy. You really don't know enough. Like just because I could be have an IQ of like 210 for all you know, and just enjoy working on back trucks. Statistics have nothing to do with it because we're talking about an individual. Like, and that was just like, and then the conversation degraded. I kept trying to like bring him around to the point of the topic, and he was like hyper focusing on this one thing. And I was like, you know what? This is my dad's page. I don't think he wants to see his thing blowing up. I don't know why the heck you thought this was an appropriate place to. And he wouldn't. I was like, let's take this conversation to private. And he's like, no, I want to have it public. I'm like, is that why you're commenting on my dad's page? Like, you think you're making a point? It was weird.
Yeah.
So weird, man. And I do kind of wonder if maybe like he knew dad, and that's how like it ended up popping up on his timeline, even though it wasn't on dad's. And like, I don't know. But it was uncomfortable and weird just because it got so personal so fast and like
So it says there is oversimplification and exaggeration fallacies.
that's not the one I'm thinking of, but I don't think it's technically a fallacy, but it's a there was a oh it's Dunning-Kruger, that's what it's called.
Oh, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah, that's not a fallacy,
Yeah,
but it's
it's
really
it's
interesting stuff.
yeah, and
It
it's
kind of
useful
goes,
especially when you find in yourself. You're like, wait a
yeah,
minute, I don't actually know anything about that.
it's kind of it's kind of like the thing I was saying the other day about how like I might
When I was talking about
respond
randomness.
to I might respond to a nothing argument with something to the effect of like I'm as likely to be right as you are
Oh.
because nothing like you can't fairly evaluate yourself because of all the biases and stuff. And then the
Mm-hmm.
Dunning-Kruger effect is a big one. It's
Yeah,
real, it's almost scary,
it kind of
you
makes
know?
you think that it kind of makes you feel like you might not actually be who you think you are.
Yeah.
The
And you
fact
run
that they
into
can just
those,
turn off a little piece of your brain and you completely change is, I mean,
it's like those sometimes you have like you go down a rabbit hole or something. You find something that is piques your curiosity and then, that one thing leads to another and blows up in your exploration of the thing. But it's like the amount of depth to a topic that you previously thought you understood is almost always is just crazy a lot.
yeah,
And that's why I think it's good to listen to experts.
right, yeah.
I mean, how else are you
I mean,
going to get that generalization of the the depth, the ideas and stuff with that amount of depth? Like you can't summarize it because you have no idea, but somebody who's studied it can sometimes,
yeah,
if you
and you don't even know where to
trust
look
them.
until you do.
Yeah, yeah. That's another thing that's really hard is like where to look. Like you have books, you have research articles, you have the news media. Have you ever heard of the CRAPS study? The CRAPS
Mm.
test is something that I really liked. Like um, we did it for a little while, like on every single reference we'd use just to practice using it. And I thought it was really useful and I kind of want to do it more often. It's a CRAAP test. It stands for currency, which is how recent, basically, or the relevancy of
Not money.
the time frame. No, it's talking about like the relevancy of the time frame that the reference is from, the accuracy or the reliability, the truthfulness, the correctness of the content. So that would be like, like how specific, or like, yeah, just there are a lot of different ways to measure accuracy. But then they have the relevance. So that's like, you have the reference, but it might not be relevant to the thing that you're discussing. The purpose, the reason the information exists. So that's like, that would go into like framing and stuff. Like, if this piece of information exists to push a specific narrative, like it's propaganda or something, well, that's going to give you a lower score on that section. So like each one of these, you're evaluating. They have like a list of things that for you to look at, very specific things that aren't hard to find, and then you give it a number. So then you add up all the numbers, and that's its score.
But
It's craps score. The last
that's a pretty
thing, the authority, which is like the institution that issued it, or the publisher or whatever.
but each one of those,
And
except for
yeah,
the first one, that's a pretty subjective measure.
no, the so there is a lot of subjectivity, but it's made more useful because it has very specific things that you can answer. Like
Okay. So
like
it has like a questionnaire
yeah. So
type.
I mean, in this one that I just googled, and it's clearly not as in depth as whatever one I learned about in the class I was taking. But so it's like, for currency, it says, when was the information published or posted? Has the information been revised or updated? Does your topic require current information, or will older sources work as well? Are the links functional? So like the very specific things that you can answer. And like, if you can't answer it, then in your head, here's where it's
Oh,
subjective. You can't answer the question in your head. You might be like, so maybe there's 5 questions, and if you can't answer one, then you're like 4 out of 5.
so this is more for like you to use, not to say this study's good because it has a high crap score. This is more for your
um
personal analysis.
it's
Make sure
definitely
you're
for your own personal analysis. It's to give you a reference point so that you can it's to give you an it's to give you objective reference points so that you can be less biased in the
right.
in your
That's useful.
sources. Yeah.
Yeah, I was imagining it for like, no, this data is valid because it has a this is proof because it has a high crap score, and I'm just like, that's the same problem with like meta-analyses. Like it all depends on whether or not they're done well. Like
Yeah,
you're
and
still trusting a
it can get into your um to adding credibility to your arguments, but you wouldn't use craps score in your arguments. You would use the specific elements of, so it's like,
right.
when was the information published or posted? Like, somebody might say, oh, that's not relevant because it was XYZ, and you say, well, no, it is relevant because of this time frame, or it's been updated to include that information or whatever.
And then all inclusive, it has the counter like issue. It would counter other issues that would come up. Like it's commonly used where like a this is fictional, but like let's say the tobacco companies, it went back when they were trying to argue cigarettes weren't unhealthy, they could fund a really big study and it's newer and it's bigger, therefore it's better. But then the craft score would also have the countering those conflict of interest with
Right.
the
That would go into
so
the purpose behind the information.
as all encompassing, even though it's newer and a bigger study, it would also counter with the other
And it,
information it wants to throw out.
and because of your bias, you might think that that information is less, right? Like it's because it was funded by those companies, you might think that that automatically makes it um, an unreliable source. It's like, but if you do the CRAPS study, it can be a reliable source if it meets the other criteria, but it's going to get a lower score than
Right.
some other sources might get because it would rate very low on this purpose section.
That sounds like something I might want to play with Chat GPT about. What scraps
Um,
score do you give this?
can you give me an example of a apps? Now I have Bard, but I mean, how different are they really?
Oh, depends
It
on
did
what you're using it
not.
for. Yes.
It did not give me. It did not give me an example. It gave me questions. It gave me a list of useful questions to ask.
Oh, but it did recognize the craps.
Yeah, it's very common. It's very commonly used test. Like it's very uh, validated. Like it has a lot of there's been in its development, it's been tested thoroughly for balance. Like to give um yeah. Anyway,
Well, Chat GPT only gave me basically what you told me, the explanation of the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna go.
I'll have to feed it an article and have it see if it'll figure it out. Oh, where did you go? Which tab are you on? There you go. I have so many tabs, and Brave has groups, so I have like 20 tabs plus like 20 groups open, and the tabs are like this wide to click on now because I have so many. And it saves them, so you can close it and reopen it, and it'll just open them all again.
Yeah, you should get like shortcuts to your groups.
Well, there's a way to bookmark a group, but there's no way. Or no, I think there's a way to pull it from bookmarks into a group, but there's no way to go the other way. And I submitted a ticket for it to like, you guys should like have the other side of this, but nobody's done anything with it. And it's
Well, you can write
I have
scripts and
bad.
stuff if you want.
Maybe, probably. I mean, I could just go in and add the feature. I submitted the ticket. Now I can go in and add the feature because it's open source.
Well, that's cool.
But I don't know if they'd accept it. A lot of the big open source don't want to accept all the features, but the
But can
code
you
base is
use
so
it?
large that
Can you use it for
I
yourself? Can you update your own browser?
oh sure, I could
That's
compile
cool.
my own browser, but that would be a lot of work that I should be
Well,
doing
I mean,
anyway. But
can you just add
it's a
it to
hurdle.
theirs? Like, do you have to compile the entire stop
If
mute?
and until they stop interrupting, until they accepted it and compiled it, I would have to download the source code and compile it all myself, which it
Yeah.
isn't as simple of a task as like downloading and hit compiling. Like it's generally it's takes a bit of work and practice, and I've never done any project that big, so it's daunting.
Yeah.
But it's something I should be working on anyway, so I really should just get my butt in gear and do it. Work on it until I've done it. But
Yeah. Um, bye. See you later.
have a good one.
I can't do it. Well, careful. Be throwing up gang signs or something. Okay.
All
See
right,
you
bye.
next time.
Until next time.